see by the clock on the wall it's a little bit past, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are pleased that you are here for the reopening of the Farragut Folklife Museum after its remodeling. As part of the reopening ceremony, we are pleased to present the museum's summarization of history of Farragut and Concord. What we are to present is based on archives that are many displayed in our museum. We will present historical facts, events, writings that are directly associated with Farragut and Concord. I want to introduce our speakers. I'm Louis LaMarche. I'm chair of the museum committee. Number one over there is Mona Smith, the guiding light of this presentation. Without Mona, none of this would have been capable or possible. She did all the legwork. Next to Mona is one of our native sons, Malcolm Shell. He's the vice chair of the museum committee, and all of you know him by his writings in the papers. Next to Malcolm is Mr. Gerald Augustus, our own great historian in this area that you've heard many times talking about events of the Civil War. Next to him is Franklin Galbraith, another native son, one of the major speakers, and his knowledge of the attack on Pearl Harbor, the day of infamy in 1941, many of you heard. Next to Franklin is Jack Bondurant, a Franklin native and knowledgeable on much of Farragut's history. And next to Jack is Ralph McGill, the mayor of our town, who most of you all know, a very big contributor to the formation of this town. Without further ado, I'd like to tell you that please hold any questions until after we finish, and we'll entertain some of them then so the speakers can continue with that. You should be able to follow each speaker with their slides on the screen. Mona?
Okay, I'm Malcolm Shell, and you know, I look and I see Mac Abel sitting back there, and Mac Abel is a historian for the city, really, and he should be the one to be up here. But so Mac, if I make a mistake, correct me, okay? Okay. A bit about our area before, you might say prehistoric. There were settlers in this area here 10,000 years ago, but I'm not going to get into that. Only about 3,000 years ago, there was another group of people who moved in, and they called themselves the early Mississippians. And they, over a period of several centuries, they broke down into 3 distinct tribes, and they were called the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and the Creeks. Now, sometime after 1000 AD, a new group of people moved into the area, and they were completely different from the early Mississippians. The early Mississippians spoke a common language called Muskogean, and these people spoke a completely different language. And when Hernando de Soto came through the area in 1540, his guides and interpreters introduced these people to him as people of a different speech. It was Teoloki in their name. And so we wonder where they came from. But now we're pretty sure where they came from. Their language similarities is very similar to the Iroquois Indians of the upper Great Lakes area. So at some time they broke off from their parent tribe and moved south. We don't really know why, but apparently maybe it was warmer or better hunting or something. The first European settlers to come to this area, of course, they were always trappers and traders and adventurers moving through. But the first permanent settlers arrived here on March 7, 1787. And I've always wondered why that's not the birthplace of our town, because that's when they first arrived. There were 2 people, David Campbell, Captain David Campbell, and Archibald McCallum. They were soon joined by 2 other of the Campbell clan, Elder David Campbell, Alexander Campbell, and James Campbell, known as Big Jimmy. He was about 400 pounds and about 6'8". And so when they realized that there were Native Americans around looking on, they used to send Big Jimmy out to walk around the fort, you know. And people would think, well, maybe if they're as big as this guy, we don't need to mess with them. But they built their cabins pretty much in the center of Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road. So there's a Phillips 66 station there now, and that would have been within the confines of the fort. And the reason they did that is because down at the bottom of the hill, where the Farragut baseball diamond is now located, there was a huge spring. And they would have noticed that spring as they moved west. And so that provided fresh water and places to store their perishable food. Settlers had numerous close calls in their time here. You might say actually Farragut existed because of an oversight. Actually, when the Native Americans were actually moving past, there's about 1,500 of them. They were moving past Campbell Station, going to Knoxville, and their intent was to attack the fort in Knoxville, which is called White's Ford. And in so doing, they passed within 200 yards of Campbell Station. Apparently, they didn't realize that there was a settlement here, but what they wanted to do was to reach Knoxville before dawn so that they could attack while the settlers were still asleep. When they got to about the area of Cabot Station, or what's present-day Walker Springs Road, they heard a cannon fire in the distance, and it was the custom of a group of soldiers who were stationed there at White's Ford with them to fire a cannon at dawn. So when they heard the cannon fire, they realized that they couldn't really get there. But they happened to notice that there was another station called Cabot Station. So they attacked Cabot Station, and they wiped out the Cabot Station. And so about midday of that day, the people from Knoxville realized what had happened, so they came to investigate. And they found the massacre, and they moved on to to Campbell Station, thinking they'd find the same thing. But when they got here, they found the people intact and ready for battle. Now, the people at Campbell Station never even knew that they had passed by until the next morning when they discovered where they walked. And there was about 1,500 of them. Some of them were mounted on horses. So, to give you some idea of the odds, there were about 1,500 of them, and there were only 11 people at the station at that time, 11 families. So they took a vote, and they all decided unanimously that they would try to defend the station. It'd be 11 against 1,500. But it was I guess that speaks something of their Scotch-Irish heritage. But anyway, they never had to do that. So they completely overlooked it. I'd like to talk about now some of the growth of Campbell Station. Between 1800 and 1855, Campbell Station became the jumping off point for settlers moving west. And sometimes as many as 60 families would gather at the station and to be guided through the Cumberland district settlements on to Nashboro, or which is now called Nashville. And these Cumberland guards would guide them, and it would help them to protect them, of course, from the Native Americans. Campbell Station grew rapidly as a road was surveyed finally in 1788, and it was the completion of a road between Nashville and Campbell Station, which was completed in 1787. So Charles McClung, who also laid out most of the streets in Knoxville, also surveyed this road. Now you have to remember, this was all virgin forest, so what he tried to do was follow the crest of hills and things, but he had to cut his way through. And you can imagine what a job that was. So, but huge trees and what have you. At one time, Campbell Station actually had more businesses than Knoxville. It had a tannery, a cabinet shop, a wagon shop, and what have you. In fact, David Campbell and McClung went together and opened a general assortment of merchandise store there, and they became partners in that business. It was a huge store. McClung owned a farm where Willow Creek Golf Course is now located. David Campbell was kind of the patriarch of this area. He, and along with Elder David Campbell, and but he, in 1823, he sold out his holdings here and moved to Wilson County, Tennessee, which is just outside the city of Lebanon. And there's always been much speculation as to why he moved. His second wife, his first wife Margaret, passed away in 1799, and in 1804 he married the widow of Samuel Cowan, who was a well-known Knoxville businessman. And with his new wife in 1823 he moved further west. Jane Cowan was a strong abolitionist. She was anti-slavery, and so there were quite a few slaves here. And then David Campbell himself owned slaves. So I think what he did, he just couldn't stand to try to stay at a place who had his name, and realizing that the best thing to do was just to move on. In 1832, he passed away there, by the way, in 1832. He's buried in Leeville Cemetery on Leeville Pike, and if you've been there, there's quite a nice monument to David Campbell. He sold out to a man named Samuel Martin, and in 1823, and Martin built the huge house on the northwest corner of Kingston Pike that you see up here now. Just east of that house on Campbell Station Road, there was a blockhouse which became Campbell Station Inn. It was a well-known inn, and many notable people stopped there. One of the most notable people who stopped there was the King of France, who would later become the King of France, and his name was Louis Philippe. He was known as Citizen King, and he ruled France from 1830 until 1848, when he abdicated the throne and spent the rest of his time in England. But during Napoleon's time, of course, he was of royal heritage, so he had to remain outside of France. So he came to Philadelphia, and he spent 4 years in Philadelphia, and during that time he toured the southern colonies. And so he spent time at Campbell Station. One of the emissaries later on from Campbell Station and visited him in France and Paris. And when he told him where he was from, the first question the king asked was, "Do they still sleep 4 in a bed at Campbell Station?" So there were other notables that stopped here. G.W. Featherstone, who was a well-known British geologist, and Andre Michaud, which was a French botanist, and a number of others. Of course, Andrew Jackson was there numerous times at the end. So that's how it started. It started in 1787. Actually, some of the people, what happened to them? Well, you know, Campbell moved on to Wilson County. Archibald McCaleb was one of the first volunteers that fought in the Revolutionary War, the Battle of New Orleans. He joined with Jackson there, and after the war was over, he came back to Campbell Station, and he was killed a short time later on Turkey Creek by a roving Indian party. So actually, even at that time, there was still lots of threat in the area. I guess that about sums it up as far as the early settlers to this area. I'd like to say a few words now about the establishment of Concord. In 1854, the area that's now Concord was very sparsely settled, and it was owned by several families, but the biggest landholder was the Rogers family, and in 1854, the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad started laying track there, and he decided that it would be a boon to the country, so he actually owned the land along the sinking